Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be talking about how to prune a tree to reduce its size but still retain its nice natural looks and its shape. So I'm going to be doing it on this larch, for example. The problem with this larch is we don't mind it getting taller. It would be nice to get a bit of a taller tree here for some shelter. This is a very windy garden, but we don't want all these lower branches because the problem is we can't get in and amongst the grass here to cut the lawn. And the other problem is it's starting to grow over a little bit here towards the stone shed here, and so it's going to be getting in our way. And then the other problem is on this side as well, it's getting in the way of the access up and down to the garden. So we need to reduce the size of this, but you don't want to go in and just cut it without thinking about how you're going to cut the plant. And I'll show you the reason why, because basically if you do that you'll end up with a hedge and you won't end up with a nice looking tree with a good branch structure. So I'll take you now to another conifer which has a similar growing habit, which has been cut like a hedge, and you'll see why you need to cut it selectively. So there's two conifers down here which grow in a similar way to the larch, with a single leader and then branching as it goes up. So this one here is a Sitka spruce, and we've also got a Nordman fir down the bottom there. Now these have both been pruned but not selectively. Basically what we've done here, so you can see for example in this section, if you wanted to take these branches, we just cut them straight off at a straight line. What that causes is lots of further branching further down on the tree, and you get real issues with it just basically getting really bushy. It loses that natural shape and you don't get that nice natural tapering and Christmas tree appearance. And so you can also see it's happened in this tree here. This is one that I've cut a little bit more selectively, so it's not such a defined head shape, but still it's getting a very flattened shape. It's losing some of that natural appearance. Now this doesn't just apply to conifers with a single leader, it also applies to deciduous trees, and I'll show you one where I've pruned it recently to show you the difference with pruning that selectively to reduce the size but retain the shape. So this tree here is an example of one that I've actually done quite severe prune on it, but I've still managed to retain most of its natural shape, and it should grow away fairly well next year because of it. So I'll show you before and after photo now. You can see how big it was and how much I've actually taken off from this tree. So the way I've retained the shape is I've taken off actually quite a large shoot. It's one of the bigger ones, so you can see up there it was quite large, and I've actually kept a nice one just next to it coming up from the side, which will take up any of the growth and help it retain a good natural shape. And there's been several lower ones down as well that I've cut off in the past. You can see this one for example, I've cut it off here and it's just grown out in a nice natural shape. And so this tree should look quite nice in a few years time, and if I do need to keep it small, I can just continue with that pruning, and it's not going to get this horrible bushy shape and look really unkept. And the reason we need to keep this one small is because it's so close to the wall. If it gets too big, there's a risk of it pushing it over. So this is just an example on a deciduous tree, how you can prune it in that way, leaving a little bit of a longer section, allowing that to take up the natural growth. And it will look much better if you can keep that on it instead of cutting it flat. Otherwise you'll just get a really shrubby mess and not a nicely shaped tree. So when it comes to pruning and doing it selectively to keep the natural shape, what you want to do is you want to look at a branch such as this one here. I'll use this as an example. You want to decide roughly how far back you want to prune it, but that isn't going to be a definite position. You then need to use that position to work out where you're actually going to prune it. So for this one, for example, it would be nice to cut it back to about this level. But if I cut it back here, you're just left with a really thick stem ending up with a thick stem. What that will do is there's a couple of things that can happen. One, it will cause all the further down branches to grow very aggressively. What happens with trees is the shoots at the top of the stem, they actually produce hormones, and they suppress any of the shoots further back or any of the branches further down on the tree from growing as quick. That's why as a tree grows, you'll tend to find the branches lower down don't grow anymore, and they just stay quite small, and the branches higher up tend to get larger and spread out. So if you were just to cut this off here, that hormone would be stopped, and then all these back branches would grow extra strong and vigorous, and it would just get really bushy and congested back here. And you might also get a lot of new shoots appearing from here, but they'll be water shoots. There'll be lots of them, very long and thin, and it'll just look really unnatural. Now that's not such a big issue with conifers because they don't tend to sprout from areas where there's not any small branches, but certainly with deciduous trees that could be a major issue. So what I want to do is actually look back here and prune it at a section where it's got a nice branch just behind it where it's going to grow out and become a new leader. So this one, for example, at the back here would be quite nice. You can see there that would actually grow out and become a nice natural looking shape. So I'm just going to look here, find a branch that needs pruning and figure out where to prune it. So this one, for example, here, this one's a bit long. If I prune it off at this section, that could become the new leader and retain the shape. So if I just cut that off there, you can see that's going to give that nice natural appearance, and it doesn't stop in an abrupt end to the thick stem. It then tapers off to a thinner one. That one will grow faster than the other ones, and it will just keep that nice looking appearance to the plant. So I can show you down here an example that would be incorrect. If I cut this one off at this point here, you've got this big unnatural stump. You're going to have some weird regrowth, so I want to cut it back probably to about this section here, where it's going to naturally resprout, and this will become the new leader. You might find that some of these don't point forward enough, so you might want to go back to one that's a bit more of a nice shape. But generally that's what you need to do, and go around doing that, you'll end up with a much nicer shape to your tree. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give this a prune, and then I'll show you some before and after photos and show you the difference and how it's not going to be too congested. It'll still look quite natural, and if you do it really well and you do it every year, it might actually look like it's never been pruned. This tree, for example, has had this treatment yearly. It doesn't look too congested. It is a bit thick. I need to prune it again this year, but it's generally kept a similar size. We've kept it small, regular pruning, and you can't really see it's been pruned regularly because sections where I have cut it off in the past, such as this bit here, although it was quite thick and then it went to thinner stems, these two thinner ones, because they've been in place, they've managed to thicken up, and so you've got this nice taper now, and the original cut will almost disappear. It's the same with some of the other ones back here. So for example, I've got this shoot at this section, and also this one here. They've all been pruned in the past. I've left one to grow up next to it, and so it just looks like a natural taper in the plant. It doesn't look like it's been cut back hard, and you're not going to end up with a weird kind of hedge-shaped plant or a thicket like that. So that's the pruning now finished on the larch tree here. Now I've just kind of gone for a pear shape. Larch trees at this age should have a rough sort of pear shape, a bit like a Christmas tree shape, and that's just a natural shape that they'll have until they get a bit older. So that's one I've retained. I've taken off a little bit on the side here, a little bit on this side as well, so it's not been a massive cut that I've done, but you can see some of the cuts are fairly substantial, such as this one here, about the thickness of my finger, and you can see I've got that nice bit coming off to the side just to keep the shape. So I managed to keep it fairly nice. Now it is getting quite thick at the moment. I might have to think about thinning it out. When you do this kind of pruning, although you avoid most of the problems that you normally get with congestion, is if you just pruned it without thinking about how to prune it, it does generally give you a slightly thicker appearance to the tree. So I'll see how this grows, but generally when larch trees are young, they are really dense and you can't see through them anyway, so that's quite natural for this type of tree. So that's all from this video. I'll leave you with some before and after photos, and that's basically how to prune a tree nice and selectively so you can have some nice natural growth on it, and it will actually also make sure it's a much stronger tree. If it grows from a very thick to a very thin stem with water shoots as they're called, then they can easily snap off in the wind. And one more thing to add is the time of year. If you're thinking of doing this pruning, the best time is winter when the trees are dormant, because you can actually see the branches better. There's no leaves on the trees, so you can see what you're doing. Now of course this is a deciduous conifer. If you're doing it with another type of conifer that's evergreen such as this here, then you can do it any time of year really, but ideally again if you do it in winter, it's less chance of the tree bleeding and loss of sap. And the only trees that you wouldn't do in winter would be anything from the Prunus genus, so cherry trees and plum trees, because there's a disease which can set in called silver leaf, and if you do that in winter that can be an issue. But otherwise, do it when the trees are dormant and there's no leaves, so you can see what you're doing, and all the energy of the tree is stored in the roots in that time of year, and so the tree will not suffer too badly at all. If you do it in summer when a lot of the energy is in the branches and the leaves, they'll just suffer a little bit more.